Okay, we see your slides. But you are muted.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay, well, let's do our best.
Yes.
So my presentation is kind of a discussion on the concept of self in Peirce's philosophy, and mostly in his account, semiotic account on the question of the self. And I would like to start by emphasizing that Peirce was in dialogue with Descartes and Kant. So when he starts his research on the nature of the self, he's doing it in a very anti-Cartesian standpoint. And he's denying Descartes' dualism. So we must stress that Peirce is a synergist, which means that he advocates for continuity between mind and matter, continuity between body and mind. So this is very important. And also, he is in a debate with the Kantian tradition, because Kant states that the I is we would say, the highest synthesis in our mind. The mind is the synthesis of the apperception, and this highest synthesis is the subject, the unity of the subject. And what Peirce stress is that the highest synthesis cannot be a self, but a community, must be a sort of co-mind or a collective of minds or welded minds, which would express his synergistic view. So for Peirce, the self is not something that is confined uniquely, privately in our minds, in our situated body, but has also other characteristics that are equally important. He's not denying that we have private selves, but he's saying that our private selves can only work and express themselves because they are united in their commens or comind, which are the collective of all interpretants that participate in our communication. So this is the first point that must be cleared. So let's talk about the embodied, situated, and self-conscious self. So this is one stratum. This is one, let's say, level of his analysis of the self. What he says is that if we take the self only as embodied and situated private minds, we are talking about illusions, ignorance. What he says when he discusses how the self is born in a child, for example, he gives us this example. A child hears it said that the stove is hot, but it's not, he says, because he's not feeling the heat. And indeed, the central body is not touching it. And only what that touches is hot or cold. But he touches ignorance. And it is necessary to suppose a self in which this ignorance can inhere. So testimony gives the first dawning of self-consciousness. So this is very important for epistemology. What Peirce is saying is that isolated individuals cannot pursue real knowledge. We ourselves, when we are isolated, we live in ignorance. So that's what he's stating here. The individual man, since his separate existence is manifested only by ignorance and error, so far as he's anything apart from his fellows, and from what he and they are to be is only a negation. So individual men, people, us, anyone who are totally separated from their fellows, their collective community, can live only in illusion, ignorance, and error. We know that a man is not whole so long as he is single, that he is essentially a possible member of a society, especially one man's experience is nothing if it stands alone. If he sees what others cannot, we call it hallucination. It is not my experience, but our experience that has to be thought of. And this us has indefinite possibilities. So again, we cannot assert from our own perceptions if we don't contrast our opinions and appearances with others that are with us. We cannot say if we are hallucinating or not. Only by confronting our phaneron or our appearances with others in a open dialogue is that we can assert that something is real or not. So embodied, situated, and self-conscious self are prone of ignorance. Any cognition is a consciousness of the object as represented. By self-consciousness is meant a knowledge of ourselves, not a mere feeling or subjective conditions of consciousness, but of our personal selves. Pure a perception, and here he is quoting Kant, is the self-assertion of the ego. The self-consciousness here meant is the recognition of my private self. I know that I, not merely I, exist. So what he's is trying to state here is that the pure apperception is the ego and can be only egotistic. We need something else, something more than this ego that is the what Kant defines as the highest level of the synthesis of our mind. Second point, it is the locus of sensations, wills, and cognitions. So the embodied, situated, and self-conscious self, it's also the locus of sensations, wills, and cognitions. What he says is that there are no other forms of consciousness except feeling, outer sense, the sense of alterity, and midi-sense. So feeling is the quality of our own private sensations. Outer sense is this sense of otherness, of alterity. And then we have this midi-sense, which is synthetical and mediates. It is a relate that mediates between our feelings and the sense of alterity. So by the sense of our alterity, we have either the will or the volition, something that we desired or something that we get sensations from. So from the source of otherness, outer sense, secondness, we can get both our sensations, but also our desires, our wills. And from this third aspect, which are the cognitions, we bring abstractions, suggestions, and associations. But all of this happens in our private, embodied, and situated self. So this reference to the future, which is the midi-sense, the thirdness of the triad, it is an essential element of personality. Were the ends of a person already explicit, there would be no room for development, for growth, for life. And consequently, there would be no personality. Now, you see that it is in the third aspect or the third category, which are the cognitions, abstractions, suggestions, and associations, that we open a window to acknowledge what is general beyond our own selves. So midi-sense, it is the bridge between the general ideas that are coming out from our own private lives and the general ideas that are already in the collective mind that we participate. So it is by this midi-sense that we open our windows to general possibilities that are outside our private, embodied, self-conscious self. The third aspect is that the embodied, situated, and self-conscious self actually alternates between conscious and non-conscious state. I think of consciousness as a bottomless lake whose waters seem transparent, yet into which we can clearly see but a little way. But in this water, there are countless objects at different depths, and certain influences will give certain kinds of those objects an upward impulse, which may be intense enough and continue long enough to bring them into upper visible layers. After the impulse ceases, they commence to sink downwards. So this is the interplay between what is a conscious state in a non-conscious state. The allegory or the metaphor he uses is this idea of a bottomless lake, and our private, embodied, situated, conscious self is continuously bringing up to the surface some objects of attention and putting others to the bottom. So there is this dynamism between what is immediate conscious or not. There's another self, which is a participatory or social self. So when we open the window to the otherness and start to mediate between us and the real or the community of interpretants by which we live, we start to participate in this communication process that we call semiosis. So there is a collective and distributed in the comments. The idea of a comments is fundamental, and we will come back to this in the sequence. So what Peirce says is that anyone, he talks about the man because he's talking in his own personhood, but actually any human being is a symbol. Well, so we are not confined to our private, embodied, situated self, but we are, from the beginning, when we are socialized, we become quickly part of a symbolic interchange, because we think or philosophy usually teaches us that our thoughts are in our minds, but actually it is our minds that are in the thoughts that are shared in our community. So we are symbols that participate in symbols that are much more general, and they live in the community in which we communicate, participate. So it's not thoughts that are in our minds, but our minds that are in the general thoughts that we participate. It seems to me that we are driven to this, and logically, inexorably requires that our interests shall not be limited. They must not stop at our own fate, but must embrace the whole community. Logic is rooted in the social principle. Ideas tend to spread continuously and to affect certain others which stand to them in a peculiar relation of affectability. In this spreading, they lose intensity. So the affection becomes meager, and especially the power of affecting others, but gain generality and become welded with other ideas. Now, this concept of welding is fundamental to the concept of commens, because the commens is precisely the welding, the fusion of all minds that participate in communication, that share the same thoughts. So right now, we are a commons. Right now, we are a co-mind because we are all sharing meaning. We are participating in a dialogue. And while this session continues, there is a kind of supramind, a mind that goes beyond our private mind, that is connecting the meanings that are being shared by my communication. So there is the intentional interpretant, which is the determination of the mind of the utterer, the effectual interpretant, which is the determination of the mind of the interpreter, and the communicational interpretant, or say the comminterpretant, which is the determination of that mind into which the minds of utterer and interpreter have to be fused in order that any communication should take place. This mind may be, it consists of all that is and must be well understood between utterer and interpreter in order that the sign in question should fulfill its function. So we should be at the outset, we should have a repertoire, a source of common, maybe even commonsensical information about what is being talked about. And it is this basis, this maybe we could call the collateral experience. I'm not going into this technicality right now, but there is another name for this collateral information that is the glue that welds our minds, and it is a requirement for communication and for meaning. So participatory or social self grows from private, situated, embodied minds, and through symbols, through semiosis, through communication, opens the possibilities of new interpretants, which are the coming interpretants. But there is a third self, or a third aspect of the self, that is the real or pragmatic self. It is how we express ourselves in our conduct based on purpose. So we have the private self, we have the communicative self, the sociological self, but we have what connects between them, which are our conducts, our assertions, how we live our lives, what kind of productions, what kind of works we do, what are our choices, what children I choose to have or not. So all those effects, consequences of our life are the expression of the real or pragmatic self. So when I speak of a man's real self on true nature, I mean the very springs of action in him, which means how he would act, not when in haste, but after due consideration. And by due consideration, I mean such deliberation as shall give him time to develop, to grow up to his proper manhood, which many a man never does actually attain in this world, scarce any of us fully. So the pragmatic self depends on our efforts, what we do with our lives, what what are the choices that we put in action, what are the conducts and the responsibilities we take for the conducts that we choose. A man indicates whatever is the object of his attention at the moment. He connotes whatever he knows or feels of this object, and is the incarnation of this form or intelligible species. His interpretant is the future memory of his cognition, his future self, or another person he addresses, or a sentence he writes, or a child he gets. So the real or pragmatic self is this uh, realization of the possibilities that were, since we are born, we're infused by perception, experience in our minds, bringing up a repertoire of possibilities, which we call collateral experience, and that we put in service to our community. But we can only do that if we take pragmatic action, if we express our thoughts and take responsibility for the assertions that we choose to express, and how those assertions change the world that is around us, bringing pragmatic effects to the reality in which we participate. So I have drawn this quick schema. We have the embodied self. It can be a sensualistic, hedonistic, or it can be a purely mentalistic, cocksureness self. What is important is that embodied self lives in illusion, hallucination, ignorance, and error. All of us have a little bit of embodied self all the time because we do not know everything. So we are sensitive persons. So we have the feelings. We're getting information through our perceptual apparatus. So the embodied self, which is situated, is always present in our lives. The question is, we cannot live in a hedonistic realm only, or we cannot live only in our a priori beliefs, our, to talk about Peirce's fixation of beliefs, our tenacious beliefs. So we must live to the alterity of the world. and we must search for the commens, which is the social, logical, humble, fallible self. So when we get to the comments, we realize that all our cocksureness or all our sensualist impressions have little meaning if they cannot participate in this larger community of possible interpretants. So to live in a social life, a logical, we must be altruistic. Altruism is a rule of logic. We must be ready to give up our own opinions or our own quick happiness, hedonistic happiness, and put ourselves in service of a larger goal, over a larger purpose, which is the construction of meaning, of social meaning in a participatory society. Now, we have these two ideal poles, let's say. So they are extremes or extrema. Actually, no one lives in the commons completely. You ought to be totally disembodied. You ought to be a saint, ascetic, something that is completely given to others, altruistic. This is, let's say, a religious attitude. So no one is actually totally involved in this sort of logical, social, humble, infallible semiosis. Actually, we are in the middle. We are halfway between one and the other. The question is, where do you put yourself? And this is the title of my intervention, The Search of a Lost Self, because which dot in this continuous line you choose to be yourself? And that is the big question that we should put ourselves. Where do I want to be? Closer to my sensualist embodied self or closer to the commens? So this is a decision, a pragmatic decision that only us, each of us, must take and bear the consequences. Do I still have some minutes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, may I continue?
Yes.
Okay, so I brought you I brought you this figure that I have produced for a different article, but I think can illustrate the way I understand the complexity of the self. So we have this, what we could say, this bottomless lake. We have here the bottom, the grounding, where there is collateral experience. And those collateral experience, at some point, by attention, they come to the surface and they present themselves. And by presenting themselves, we put them in association through abstraction, conjectures with other things. So we start to represent. And then by representing to others, we participate in a communication. Now, this figure is actually how Venus de Milos was produced by Praxiteles, which is the sculptor, to Knossos, which was the original city to where the statue was designed to be. So I use this allegory or this metaphor to explain how there are levels or periods, grounding, presentation, representation, communication, by which our private selves goes towards the commens. And how does he do that? Well, he starts by the cycle of perception and action. Then he goes to the cycle of experience and execution. Then he goes to the cycle of comprehension, instruction, and finally to the cycle of sharing and controlling. So we have here the real pragmatic self in action, starting from perception action in the bottomless lake, getting from perception the information, non-conscious information that will be the collateral experience, and then we go up towards our expression, our community. And this is the fruits. This is what Peirce says we should bring to our community. This is the child I put in the world. This is a book that I write. This is a conference that I deliver. So this schema tries to put all those ideas together in a illustration, and that's how I think that Peirce's conception of the self, the three dimensions, the embodied, the social comments, and the real pragmatic can be put together and understood in all its complexity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have time for questions. So, yes, we have a question from Tartu. Please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Israel?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
yes,
thank you very much.
Hear you.
Oh, great, Vinicius. Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoyed that. I have lots of different questions, but I guess I'm intrigued with the through line, the connection between the metaphor of the bottomless lake. I'm very intrigued with Peirce employing that, and how could you, and you've done, I'm really glad you took the time to use that last diagram because it actually answers most of my question. But I was wondering if you would be willing to just comment a little bit more on the connection between the bottomless lake, Peirce's conception of the bottomless lake, the grounding level, and how that resolves the contradiction or the tension between the embodied sort of selfish self and the more communal, humble self. It seems that there's a continuous tension there that has to be resolved. Does Peirce talk about how the bottomless lake and how the ground can help through endless semiosis help resolve this tension to be the real self, so to speak, somewhere in between? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Josh. Yes, because when we perceive the world, we perceive the real, we're getting non-conscious information, and actually what will be the basis of the ground of our social semiosis is the fact that we all perceive the same reality. So there is something that is not influenced by our minds, but that influences our minds. So whenever we are in the world, we are perceiving and collecting information. And this information is non-conscious at its first starting point. So it goes to this bottomless lake, and it stays there for whenever the occasion of a concept that will need this iconic qualitative information that is embodied in the grounding level. So whenever there is a situation, a occasion in which a concept must grow, a concept must learn, the basis of its learning, it is already there in the bottomless lake. So we know more than we know that we know. So actually, there's much more that we know that we are not conscious of. And it is this bottomless reservoir of knowledge that is not yet conscious that will be the basis of our exchange of information in our community.
Great. Yeah, thank you. We could talk about it later because I know we'll work together later, but I just want to bookmark like the connection, the possible connection, and you know more about this than I, but I love the idea of how it is you navigate the bottomless lake via perhaps positive sympathies via agapistic evolution. So, but you know, we could talk about that.
Great. Agapistic evolution. Great. I agree.
Yeah. Israel, we have another question here. It looks like there's a hand up. So
Yeah.
just come back to us, Israel.
Yes, we can go to Georgi and then go back to Anna.
Great, thank you.
Yes, good evening. I'm Georgi Iliev from the
Hello, Georgi.
Hello, I am Georgi Iliev from the Institute of Literature in Bulgaria, and theory of literature is my department. And I have a small Persian question. Now, as early as his early articles on some faculties claimed to man and on the consequences of the four incapacities, Charles Peirce introduces his doctrine of the thought sign, namely the idea that there is not a single thought that is purely individual. All thoughts are communicated, and they are communicated in science, because we know that thinking goes only in science. And that is why, and that is how the semiosis gets unlimited, gets infinite. Interpretant after interpretant, it evolves and it never ends. But that's, as far as I know, that's only valid for the early Peirce. Later on, in his essay, for example, The Fixation of Belief, he introduces the idea of the hardcore reality, which is a corrective of our hypotheses or abductions. And it seems that at a certain point, the community of inquirers shall find the final truth about reality. And that sounds a bit contradictory compared to the early concept of unlimited semiosis. And I want to ask you, what is your opinion? Does Peirce actually, at a certain point in his development, think that there would be a final justification within the final truth of reality? It was a wonderful lecture of yours, and I want to ask this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgi. It is a wonderful question. You are right. Peirce, in his early writings, he defended the idea of unlimited semiosis, but in principle. So it would be a logical consequence of his doctrine. Later on, in his mature years, he came to the idea that actually when you put together semiotics and pragmatism, and that's what he's after in his final years of research, he's trying to put together pragmatism, his version of pragmatism and semiotics. He came to understand that there is an economy of research. So a community of inquirers should not spend time and resources beyond the pragmatic needs, which are historical. So there is not a final semiosis, but there is a point in which going further makes no sense if we have the information at hand. So later on, if new information, if new doubts come, since we are fallible, since no one has the final answer, and since we are cynicists, we must open to the possibility of restarting the research. So we should not go on forever if we have reached an answer that for all purposes works together, works fine. So this is his Economy of Research, which is a wonderful text. If you do not know, I should advise you to read it. I think it will answer your question.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now we can take it back to Tartu and to our good friends there.
Hi, can you hear me again?
Yes.
Hey, I enjoyed the presentation and especially the part when you talked about pragmatical self. But would you consider actually, let's just put experiences and efforts aside, would you consider that the core of the pragmatical self is one imagination?
I don't get it. Why imagination? I don't get it.
One's
Sorry.
imagination, like imagination is the core. Aside experience, aside effort, imagination, just
No,
imagination.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I now I get it. Thank you. I think it's purpose. The right word is purpose. General purposes. So general purposes for Peirce are the ones that has a futurity or a would be or a virtuality. So general purposes, we can, in a certain sense, expect some general effects, some general qualities of effects. So this is what Peirce is talking about when he talks about admirability. What is admirable? The aesthetical dimension of our purposes. So we must only or always be inspired by the sense of admirable. And when he talks about the real self or pragmatic self, I think there is this sense of one's connected with the harmony of the cosmos. It is something metaphysical, cosmological, but what he's after is this very broad dimension by which we search a harmony with all the events or facts that are around us.
But imagination is admirable.
Well, imagination, I think it is something very particular to one mind, unless you're talking about social imagination, like dreams, like we are dreaming about a better future. We're imagining a world in which there's no war, in which we live in peace. So if we're talking about this sort of imagination, I think this goes into this idea of admirable. But if we are talking about imagination as dreams, private imagination, like an artist that is creating things
with each other. Excuse me to say this, but imagination and dreams have nothing to do with each other. They're like completely separate terms. You cannot like put imagination and dreams ever together. One is created.
I don't know.
One is created from.
I don't know why not.
Because one is created.
That's why I was asking the question, what do you mean by imagination? If you are meaning by imagination, social imagination, something that we dream together, and I'm using dreaming here in a very loose way. I'm not talking about dreams when you go to sleep and dream. I'm talking about general purposes.
You should have said wishes, like dreams. Dream for me is only the
Desires.
Yeah, that exactly. But
Okay.
also you said that we need to put aside like this, let's say unconscious, surreal. But let's say we do have our efforts. We go through them every day. So we fight with them every day. We go to sleep, and what do we see? Our subconscious and dreams. So they are still the part of us, even though maybe suppressed parts, but they're still part of us, both dreams and both imagination, in the sense of dreams being subconscious, imagination being conscious.
Great. I like the idea.
Thank you, and I liked your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Very good, very good. It's always very good when we get to new understandings. Yes, so we have also some comments from here. I think first we will have Ludmila.
Hello, Professor Romanini.
Hello, Ludmila. Good to see you. Where's Tyler?
Right here. So he is going.
Okay. Okay.
So wonderful presentation. And I want to say, first thing, I think this was a perfect session of our Semiosalong, because thanks to Bogdana and Vinicius, we put Saussure and Peirce together, which is one of our principal goals of the ISI. So thank you. And thank you, Professor Romanini, for this wonderful talk, because you explained many important topics versus pragmatism, among others. And I have a question about the notion of the commens. So it was very nice that you have chosen this notion to build your presentation upon, because it's not the most popular concept in Peirce, but it should be given more attention to. And I wanted to ask, in your understanding, what is the difference between the notion of commens and the notion of phaneron in terms of the phaneroscopy, because it's not very clear to me, and I would like to understand better, because phaneron is also everything which is present to a mind, but mind is like shared. So what is the difference between these two notions, if you can comment on that?
Okay, sure. Now, the phaneron, as you said, is everything that is present to one's mind. So the phaneron is private. The phaneron is connected to a particular mind. So right now I have whatever is present in my mind, and this is my phaneron. Now, the commens is something completely different. The commens for Peirce is the welding, the fusion of all minds that participate in semiosis. So whenever we are communicating, and maybe I should have made clear what Peirce means by utterer and interpreter. Like right now we are debating, we are discussing, we are in a communication activity. For Peirce, the utterer is not the person who is expressing a proposition. Actually, the utterer is the object of semiosis. The utterer is all the objects that we agree upon. We agree upon some objects, and this is the utterer. So the commens is the expression of the commens denotates all objects that we agree at the starting point of semiosis. And the interpretant is both our minds being influenced together. So we are welded together in the co-mind, and actually the utterer is not me or you, but the objects that are denoted by the ideas that are being exchanged. This is a very sophisticated concept, because you remember that Peirce does not like psychologists into his semiotic theory. So he's trying to avoid the idea that communication is connected to some psychological state of mind. What he's trying to say is that communication is a purely logical event, and the utterer is the object of the comments, and the co-interpretant are the minds that are welded together and getting information from the process of semiosis. I hope that was clear, because there was maybe another session and I didn't want to go into this technicality, but since you asked the question, I tried my best to answer.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, it's really interesting.
Communication is not an affair of what?
He said
Communication is not.
So can you repeat what you said, that communication was not an affair of something? Because I understood that you said communication is a logical affair or something like that.
No, it is not a matter of exchange between psychological entities. So Peirce is trying to avoid psychology. So psychological states of minds. So when he's talking about communication, the comments are the dynamic objects that are denoted in the comments. And the minds that are welded are getting information, are getting the meaning.
Okay. Okay, good. Do we have any more questions or comments? If not, just to be provocative, I have one question. And the question is, what is it meant by proper manhood in the quotation you showed?
Well, Peirce was a sexist, as I think every man in his period. So let's not go into that, because that is the dark side of Peirce that I don't want to go into that. But he was a misogynist and a sexist.
Okay, no, that's good.
But we may like his ideas and disagree with some of his attitudes.
Yes, no, this is a common problem in semiotics and linguistics also. We have...
Yeah, no, he talks about a muscular mind. He says, well, if you want to have a muscular mind, you ought to do this or that. So you get the point.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. And yes,
okay, thank you very much.
And if we don't have any more questions, we can call it a night. And next time we will have our last session. So in 2 weeks from now, April 18th, we will have our last session of this semester, and we will have our good Tyler Bennett and our good friend George Saad, both of them.
So, Maya, do you allow me to say a last word, please?
Yes, of course.
Want to apologize. I want to apologize to Bogdana for not being around, because there was a confusion in the time schedule. I was prepared to give this my talk at 11 in the night in Brazilian time. I don't know what kind of confusion we made. So Ludmila sent me a message saying, well, we are already here expecting you. So I run to my computer, and I didn't even have all my slides ready. I finished while Bogdana was giving her last talk. So I want to apologize, Bogdana, for not being able to hear her presentation.
Don't worry, I think there is a recording, so you might listen to it later. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you. I will do that.
Thank you for the apology.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It was very kind. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, there will be a recording. And I think, as Yin said in the chat, I think the problem was that we had a change of time in Czechia, so the Czech Republic. So yeah, I think that was the problem. But yeah, don't worry. things that like that just happen and it's okay. So yes, and but for our last session, we will have our good friend Tyler and our other good friend George, and we will have a very big party here. So if you are in Olomouc, please come because we will need
An online party. In Tartu.
also online party. Yes, but also, yeah, so it will be online and in person, and we do want you to come in person because we need to finish a lot of food, so please come. And yes, so yes, so well, we will see us in 2 weeks from now, in April 18, for our final session. I hope you can all come, and thanks again for coming here tonight and for being here, because as you know, if you wouldn't be here, it would be really boring. So thank you. And good night.
Well, bye.
Bye.
Slim, yeah, give us a little